Great. So, can we start? Yeah. So, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us here today. We are very delighted to have you here for this exclusive colloquy where we are going to explore the deep insights by Marcellus Investment Managers. Behold the Leviathan, the unusual rise of modern India, a remarkable newly launched book by Mr. Saurabh Mukherjee and Nandita Rajhansa. Together, they have captured the unique and dynamic transformation of India, what's happening within India. Not just in economical terms, but in social and structural changes that are shaping the country's future. It is through these lenses, Saurabh and Nandita offer us a nuanced look at the forces transforming the country. And from the advanced praises, we can only see that the book is already making waves among the thought leaders. They describe it as a firecracker of a read. And it is a must for everyone who has invested in understanding the rise of modern India. Today's discussion is an opportunity to dive deeper into these themes, and I look forward to an insightful conversation. Thank you all for being here today. Let's get started. Over to
Thank you. Thanks. So I've got one of these. Thank you so much. So folks, originally when we scheduled this, right, we thought we'll have to sort of sell the book to you a little bit, but I think social media these days creates such a buzz around these sorts of things. The book's already sold 12,000 copies, right? In 2 weeks flat, it sold 12,000 copies. So what we'll do is, by all means, we'll talk about the book. We'll tell you why, make it a little bit more interesting for you. We'll do it in the context of what I think is a remarkable earnings slowdown, right? So if you see the data, I have not put 10 years of data here, but if you leave aside COVID, you struggle to see this sort of earnings slowdown in modern India, right? It's a remarkable earnings slowdown. You can see that so far in the second quarter, just look at the, there's a pointer here, but it doesn't work on the screen. So far in the second quarter, we are already down 5% on corporate earnings. We're down 5% on corporate earnings, and my reading is it's going to actually get worse before it gets better, right? And naturally, if this quarter's earnings are down 5% YOY, then FY26 earnings are being pulled back. So already FY26 estimates have been pulled back by 3%. I think the FY26 numbers are going to come off more. So if you looked at Bloomberg estimates a couple of weeks ago, Bloomberg was saying that this fiscal we grow earnings at 9%, so single digits, and I think next fiscal estimation is 12-13%. I think those numbers are going to get tracked back further. So we've shown in the Niche wala chart. The light blue bars are the FY26 numbers. They're getting pulled back, and I think this pullback continues, right? So it's a remarkable earnings slowdown, and obviously in the context of a stock market where forward P's at the index level are still 22, 23, as opposed to a long-term average of 17 odd. This is a market which is punchily valued, and yet corporate earnings have slowed down at a remarkable rate, right? And all of us, we're all left asking, is this earnings slowdown an event for a few quarters? Is this a few quarter wala story? Is this earnings slowdown a few quarter wala story, or is it a few years ka story, right? What we'll try to do is use the book to illuminate for you what we think is going on. To cut a long story short, the crux of what's happening is a lot of what's good about India is no longer in the top 1,000 companies in our country. Right? There's a degree of vibrancy in the economy which is not entirely reflected in the stock market, which is why you're getting a disconnect between corporate earnings shrinking versus nominal GDP growing at say 10%. Just to keep it simple, nominal GDP is growing at roughly 10%, whilst corporate earnings are shrinking. And a big part of the challenge, I think, is a lot of what's vibrant in our country, doing well in our country, is not entirely coming through in the stock market. I think that disconnect will close in the coming years as more companies go public, as smaller companies become bigger. So that's the crux. So let me then jump into the book. I'll give you some quick factoids. So for example, what we are starting to find, and Nandita did a lot of this work, right? Not just in bank accounts, but even in mutual funds. Women's bank accounts have more money than men in urban areas. And in mutual funds, women's average mutual fund holding, I was starting to find out, is a quarter higher. Women's average mutual fund holdings is 25% more than men, right? And there's a whole lot of data coming through. That women's fortunes are improving very sharply, whilst men's, for the same for men is declining. Now, this has plenty of precedents. The same thing has happened in many other countries over the last 40 years, right? So, अगर 1980 से 2020 का data देखें, many other countries have gone through this. We are living through this aspect where women's fortunes are improving sharply relative to that of men, right? There's a bunch of reasons. We'll try to share some of that. Similarly, South India's ascendancy is very sharp. The peninsular seven states account for a quarter of the population, half the GDP and 2/3 of the GDP growth. And delimitation पे गर्मा गर्मी शुरू हो गई है. Delimitation 2026, I think census, Amit Shah ji has said census will be 25, right? And a couple of southern CMs have said some very interesting things. A couple of southern chief ministers have said some very interesting things about what should be done before delimitation. And then we've discussed this theme plenty of times for the rise of a new elite, right? This rise of a new elite thing, I think all of us need to understand far better, right? It is very clear that elite consumption and elite wealth in India is holding up. The middle class is getting pulverized, right? Plenty of data to suggest. So the Nestle CEO spoken about it, Bhargava Saab at Maruti has spoken about it, annual survey of industries data is showing it. Middle class is getting crushed, the elite are rocking, right? And again, it's worth understanding more about this. So the book is built around 5 themes. I've given you a flavor of those themes, right? Let me get into what are the other ways we think out of the book, right? So if you ask me that why do a lot of us get puzzled ki earnings घुस गया? A lot of people expect a free market to be a linear story. नहीं होता है. No free market moves in a linear way. It's almost always 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Okay? So the picture here is of a famous meeting that took place in September 1985, where the Americans compelled the Japanese to revalue their currency by 80%. Over the next 5 years, the yen appreciated by 80-90%. By revaluing the yen, America pushed Japan into 30 years of zero GDP growth. So had you and I met in 1985, when Japan was the world's most roaring economy, and had you and I met after this famous meeting, right? And I told you that Japan 30 साल grow नहीं करेगा, you would have said you're mad, boss. So that's how free markets work. There is no linear story in free markets. ऐसा नहीं कि मैं extrapolate करूँगा and it's going to work out. We've also got degree of non-linearity in our economy, right? So for example, if you go back to the events of early 2020, where the farm law reforms that the FDA tried to expedite, they weren't able to get it done, right? Those have consequences. If you're not able to reform the economy, you end up with consequences. They come a few years later, but there are consequences. And similarly, if you're not able to skill the vast majority of your population, you're not able to skill the population, that has consequences in terms of their earnings falling off, and consumption then takes a hit, as we have seen this quarter. Right? The second aspect is the power law. Right? It's one of the simplest laws in economics. The law says that in any competitive scenario, a disproportionate share of the spoils. In any competitive scenario, disproportionate share of the spoils will go to a tiny minority of people. Majority will not get much. So we use the Wimbledon example in the book because Wimbledon with the winner gets 50x more than the first round loser. But that's exactly how free market economies grow. The winners, in our case, roughly 250,000 families are getting the cream of India's economic growth. Then millions of people in the middle class not really getting that much. The underclass honestly is getting nothing. Similarly, Nandita has shown in the book using corporate earnings data. 70,000 companies are doing well. The remaining billion companies who pay income tax or pay corporate tax are struggling to even grow their profits at a real rate, right? This is the nature of free market economics. The small minority will get the spoils. Almost all the spoils will go to a small minority. Now, if we know this and we expect mass consumption to boom, तो फिर बहुत गलती किसकी है? Government is very clear. This is a free market economy. In a free market economy, a tiny elite does really well. Mass consumption, it's tough to push through because there's nothing in free market economics which allows the masses to prosper unless there is radical state intervention, right? And the third is the interplay of social and economic change. In our book, the most dramatic aspect of social change is women, right? I'll keep coming back to it. The data is, I think, very clear. We published this book on 21st October. A lot of people have come back to us and said, "नहीं boss, women इतना rise नहीं करते हैं." I'm sorry, but the data from RBI, from AMFI is very, very clear. Women are pulling away radically, and it's interesting. Those who are watching, those for whom you write, you should tell them that America में ये same चीज 1980 to 2020 के बीच में हुआ. American women pulled ahead of American men. Same for Korea, by the way. Over a 30 to 40 year period, Korean and American women pulled ahead of men. But if you ask them 10 years into that transition, where women were pulling ahead, they would say, no, women are not pulling ahead, we men are still rocking, right? And a lot of this is happening, as one of you highlighted, a lot of this is happening due to two interrelated factors. One is that to succeed in a modern economy, you need plenty of education. Women, for whatever reason, both in the West and in India, seem to be better at getting a lot of education. That's one of the standard things that we are seeing in America. This year in America, 60% of the first year students in college are women. By the way, Korea will be same. In most developed countries, the majority of college students are now women. Stunningly, in India, where our per capita income is 1/30th of America, India में भी majority of college students
enrollment में तो है.
Enrollment में majority of college enrollment is women, right? So modern economies require high skilling. For whatever reason, women seem to be better at getting that. Second aspect is a lot of the jobs which pay well in a modern economy are seen by men as feminine jobs. Right? So, for example, we'll discuss in the slides. Apple का जो factory है, Apple, I think yesterday Apple announced that a third of the iPhones are going to be made in India by 2027. Apple has said a third of the iPhones are going to be made by 2027. Apple has therefore announced that they're going to set up dorms for
women.
How many?
1 lakh.
1 lakh नहीं 2 lakh बोला ना. 2 lakh workers के लिए वो लोग women के लिए dorms बना देंगे, right? So why is Apple not making dorms for men? Right? You'll have to ask Tim Cook this, but my hunch is that it's not a job that men are aspiring to work, right? Putting together phones is not something which is seen as aspiration in the male context. And this is more generally true. A lot of the jobs which pay well in a modern economy are seen by men as womanly jobs, right? Right. So three aspects will bring this through. I'll use the Bangalore example because I think it's a telling example. So all of you have seen Panvel, Noida, Gurgaon, Bangalore, Hinjewadi if you're from Pune, Salt Lake if you're from Kolkata, right? Everybody's seen one of these stories where it was sort of farmland till the early 90s. So I remember going to Gurgaon till 84, 85. I grew up in Delhi, and it wasn't much other than farmland. थोड़ा एक दो building था, but by and large was farmland. Those you were from Pune, Hinjewadi भी ऐसा देखा आपने?
I don't know that.
Nandita is very young. She hasn't seen Hinjewadi in its agricultural state. But anyhow, coming back to Bangalore, till 91, what is currently Electronic City was farmland. जहाँ पे Titan का headquarters है, Infosys का headquarters है, वहाँ पे cows and bullocks were plowing the land. Ragi millet grew हो रहा था. 91, the economic reforms were experimented. Infosys IPO'd the next year. Why? Because economic reforms allowed Infosys to import computers and export IT services. Right? Infosys went public. 93, Infosys set up this campus, Electronic City. From 93 to now, the price of land in Electronic City is up to 50x. 20% CAGR. Now, if you go to Electronic City, ये सब highway वगैरह दिखता है. Nandita did this trip, right? Apple set up in Hosur, a little 20 kilometers south. Apple set up. That's the same Apple set up which Tata manages, where they're going to make a third of the world's iPhones, right? And if you go there, it's modern racing, right? Now, let's use the simple story to understand country में क्या हो रहा है. Who wins out of this? Naturally, the promoters of the IT companies whose market cap is 10, 20, 30 million dollars. The promoters win, right? They own ESOPs, they own equity, they win. The senior employees also win. They pass ESOPs, right? So you've got a tiny class of people, the senior management of IT companies and the promoters who make colossal amounts of wealth out of this boom. You have a middle class which shops in those stores, but they are small. And increasingly, as you would have seen in the IT companies' announcements over the last couple of years, headcount growth has tapered off. Right? So I think latest quarter May, all the IT companies were added 3,000-4,000 people. Right? And why has headcount growth tapered off? Because a lot of the work can be automated. This is the beginning of AI. As more of that work gets automated, the middle chunk of the IT services workforce, people who live there, are going to see further squeeze in the earnings. The owner class will have a benefit because they'll get the same amount of work done with fewer people, and margins therefore for IT services companies should hold up pretty nicely, right? Now, who are the biggest losers in this? Middle class, which are neutral hai, owner class has made a lot of money. Who are the biggest losers? The fellows who tilled the land before they were asked to leave Electronic City, the landless laborers, right? So when Anita were doing this case study, I said, no, Anita, they didn't lose. They must have gone to Hosur. So Bangalore यहाँ पे है, Electronic City यहाँ पे है, Hosur यहाँ पे. So I said, Hosur का bus ले लिए होंगे, 25 kilometers south, and they would have got a job in a factory in Hosur. Until Anita said, पूरे South India में, there's just 5 million manufacturing jobs. So the chances of those fellows who were tilling the land getting a job in a factory is pretty low. By the way, factory salaries in South India are 3x what a farmer makes. So it's meaningfully lucrative to get a factory salary in South India. But nahi milta jobs even in South India nahi. So those fellows, the landless laborers, they would have pushed further into either Tamil Nadu or Karnataka and got resettled somewhere else in Tamil Nadu or Karnataka to continue their lives. But they were uprooted from where they were, Electronic City, to go further inland. Right? So big category of losers, the landless laborers. Now, even more intriguing category are, and this is one of the most fascinating aspects of me of writing, even more intriguing category is SME. So SME, when you take an SME out of a village and you put them in a city, operating margins, think of a kirana store in a village. This village, by the way, is called Konappana Agrahara. Right? It's called Electronic City today. So the village ka naam hai Konappana Agrahara. It's in the prologue of the book, right? So Konappana Agrahara mein jo kirana store tha, that kirana store's margins are much higher than the kirana store in the suburbs of Bangalore or Bombay. So the bigger the TAM, the bigger the addressable market, the bigger the margin crunch. Right? And that's been the fate of many SMEs in India over the last 20 years. ऊपर से लगता है कि prosperity आनी चाहिए, but in reality, what the data from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs suggests is a margin, right? And you can now understand, linking it to why we are seeing a consumption slowdown in FMCG, why we are seeing a generalized mass consumption slowdown, middle class consumption slowdown. Although elite items, Titan ka jewelry, Royal Enfield ka bikes, elite items are rocking, right? A lot of this is actually very explainable if you see a free market as an exercise in the power law, right? So I'll jump here. I will jump a few slides so that we come to the actual thing. Right, we've done this before, so I'm not going to get into it. We've beaten everybody hollow in the rest of Asia. By the way, this is one of the reasons why foreign flows into India will come next year. Right? Because the gap between us, and other countries is very sharp. So this is the rest of Asia. And I've taken good, not just basket cases. China लगाया है, Indonesia लगाया है, MSCI, the MSCI EM is the entirety of EM, right?
Yeah.
So देखिए the gap between us and any other EM is so sharp that foreign money will come to India once the valuations normalize. The valuations are out of whack with reality. Once they sober up, you get plenty of foreign capital coming, but the gap between us and other countries in Asia in terms of returns is massive. So just to quickly how to explain this chart is we invested $10,000, say in 2012, we invest $10,000 in MSCI India. You do the same with other countries, China, Indonesia, yeah. And then you let it run. You can see that in the case of South Korea is the best of the other markets. In the case of South Korea, the $10,000 becomes $11,000. In India's case, the $10,000 becomes close to $23,000. Right? So that gap, South Korea at 11, India at 23 is huge. That is bringing in foreign investors. I know we सब selling दिख रहा है, but once the valuation is normalized, you will see the return because this gap is massive and it's not clear to me other Asian countries can match our ability to deliver results. Now let's get into some data. Right, we've done this before, but I'll do another iteration. So the Ministry of Corporate Affairs data, if you tease it out, it's free by the way, it's free. आप जाके आराम से download करके data देख सकते हो. It's F24 का आया नहीं है, F23 तक free है. So if you take companies in India and you put them in various buckets, right? So let's just step back and give you the numbers. 1.4 million companies in this data set.
Yes.
1.4 million. कितने लोग nil return file कर रहे हैं?
Around 1 million.
1 million nil returns.
Yeah.
ठीक है. So 1.4 million companies in the Ministry of Corporate Affairs set. 1 million are filing a nil return. So if you just see the number of nil return filers, that's risen sharply in the last decade. I think it's roughly doubled, right?
Doubled.
So 10 साल पहले 500,000 companies are filing a nil return. 1 million are filing a nil return. Now, my reading of a nil return is these companies are not making money. Other people will say evade कर रहे हैं, but I don't think it's so easy to evade in India today. My reading is if 1 million companies are filing a nil return, they're effectively saying we're not being able to make money. Okay. Now let's focus on the 400,000 who are filing a return. Out of the 400,000, the category which is rocking is sorry, थोड़ा सा formatting question. This category is companies with profits of 1 crore and
1 crore.
Right, so थोड़ा सा यहाँ पे miss हो गया. Right, so 1 crore and upwards, companies with profits of 1 crore and upwards, that's roughly 70,000 companies. Roughly 70,000 companies with profits of 1 crore and upwards. Their profits are compounding at 17%. Right, solid number. Nominal GDP growth अगर आप 10 पकड़ के चलो, 17% means they've done really well over the last decade. Right, that's 17%, 70,000 companies. Right, that's what's working. Think again, 1.4 million companies with this 70% are thriving. That means pretty much 1.3 million are having a real chance. Right, that's why I gave you the Bangalore example. Bangalore example में you know the stars, right? This Wipro, the stars पता है. What you don't see is millions of chotus having a hard time. Government of India के corporate data को दिखता है. Out of 1.4 million companies, 70,000 are rocking. They're absolutely rocking, which is why the unicorn piece, the private equity piece is so excited. Because 70,000 companies, what proportion of India's profits come from those 17%?
17, that will be around 60%.
Right, so 2/3 of our profits are coming from this 70%. Now, the ज़्यादा होगा क्योंकि इसका subset ही 85, right? 70 का subset.
Oh yeah, the subset was 650 to 60%. This is approximately 98%.
So ये 98%. This is a big deal. Yeah. So we'll correct ourselves. This 17% of India's profitable companies, which is 70,000 company, 98% of country का profit यहाँ पे. Right? Think again. 1.4 million companies. भारत सरकार का data. 1 million in return. 70,000 companies, 70,000 companies taking home 98% of the nation's profits, right? Again, I'm trying to help you contextualize the slowdown that you're seeing and why it's happening. Because the corporate sector is seeing a dramatic polarization in profits. Now let's dive into the top 70,000. Top 70,000 का subset है of 6,000 companies. Top 70,000 का भी एक subset है of 6,000 companies, which are the superstars of modern India. Right? So I'll ask Nandita to explain this. The superstars, ये वाला दोनों chart will help you understand the slowdown in far more detail than probably anything else we can do.
Right. So we looked at the government of India, the IT department data that we sort of was talking about in the previous slide in more detail, and we looked at it and we saw that there were a few companies even below that within that 70,000 number that we were seeing in the last slide, which are doing really well.
No, below. Inside
Within. It's a subset. So if you see the challengers, which is small companies and organized companies, those are around 1 to 1.5% of all of India's companies by counts, around 6,000 companies, and they account for 22% of India's profits. And the one above that, the rulers, basically these are the large companies and organized companies, which are around 900 approximately companies, which are the larger listed players that we are typically used to seeing mostly. Now, what is more interesting within these two buckets is that the challengers, which are the companies which are earning anywhere between $6 million to $60 million of PAT, are the ones which are growing the fastest. If you look at the chart which is on the left hand side, the decile 2, which is the dark blue black line, is completely ripping through. The decile 1, which is typically the larger companies, are not growing as fast. So on an absolute level, their PAT is higher, obviously, yes, but the growth story comes from decile 2.
And increasingly, India's stock market is about this decile, right? So India's stock market is increasingly about this decile. This is the stock market, decile 2. Right? Decile 1. Decile 1 of the largest companies. Stock market is about the largest companies. Right? But the real boom is decile 2. Right? Below the top 900 companies is where the fun is. So challenges is where the fun is. The rulers, the top 900 companies, which is our stock market. Our stock market will life kya hai? Top 900 companies, their lives, they are falling behind. If you see, right, if you date back to this basically starts somewhere around GST demon the gap starts opening up as the government drives a white money agenda, as the government drives a formalization agenda, as GST integrates the country into a unified economy. A tiny elite of 6,000 companies pull away. The purane zamane ka 900 giants that are listed that we invest in, they're having a harder time dealing with the new generation. Right now, why is that? So I've given you the numbers wala story. Rulers are 900 companies, challengers are 6,000 companies. Rulers plus challengers is 85% of the country's profits. Right? But why is it that the rulers are fighting to deal with the challengers? Why are the challengers growing faster? Why is nominal GDP growing at 10%? Why is corporate earnings are shrinking? So all of these questions are linked to the fact that the nature of what is required to succeed in modern India is changing. So पुराने ज़माने का bricks and mortar का model, slow moving bricks and mortar का model is having a far harder time dealing with companies which are using the India stack, using NPCI, the UPI, using social media for marketing and ramping rapid. Right? And I'll be the first one to admit that even for me, I'm generation ahead of Nandita. For our generation, we're having to rethink what constitutes a successful business, because increasingly what constitutes a successful business is around 50 people in a small room with huge digital skills, digital marketing skills, digital product creation skills, ramping rapidly and taking away market share. Right? And I'll give you an example of that. आपने इस क्वार्टर डीमार्ट का earnings release suna hai. DMart, credit to them, were very clear in saying that QCOM is having an effect on DMart, right? If I had to give you the crux of the ruler versus challenger ka example, that's a classic example. DMart is a classic ruler company, right? Well run, conventional grocery retailing format, right? Solid promoters, solid fundamentals, great management team, compelling offerings, saste mein FMCG mil raha hai, etc. Good location, etc. But clearly, QCOM, which till 2 years ago wouldn't have featured in our dialogue, is taking meaningful earning share from DMart, and even we as shareholders in Trent are trying to figure out Star Bazaar pe effect aa raha hai ya nahi, QCOM, right? QCOM is challenger at its rawest and simplest to understand, right? Ek tarika that my generation won't be able to understand why somebody needs to get a jar of coffee for 100 rupees in 5 minutes. Right? मैं तो बोलूँगा चलो ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा मैं ऑनलाइन कर देता हूँ, I'll get it tomorrow. But the generation after me is saying jar of coffee क्या, chess board भी चाहिए तो अभी चाहिए, 5 मिनट में चाहिए, and therefore QCOM is rocking and DMart as a straightforward ruler franchise. So just think about it, right? GDP growth 10, earnings growth negative. Q, because the challenger ecosystem is not fully reflected in the stock market, and I gave you the DMart versus QCOM ka example as to what's exemplifying this thing. Just to move further into some of the more provocative themes. So the 5 themes quickly in the book are women rising faster than men, newly educated elite, the elite basically booming, the middle class struggling, right? South roaring away, right? China +1 becoming a massive driver of the economy, and finally outsourcing of white collar jobs. Office wala jobs coming to India in larger numbers. So we'll do a couple of these themes. And we'll do the most provocative one first. So, Nanita, why don't you talk through this theme, and then we'll get into we'll contextualize this theme given what's happened in the last 3 months.
Right. So Saurabh already touched upon it briefly, but I will go in greater depths now. So what have we been seeing? So the rise of women is nothing that has happened in the last 1 or 2 years. It's a decade long or more than a decade long process. It had been happening under the surface, and oftentimes change is really imperceptible until and unless the results come and glare you in the face. So this has been happening for quite some time. So I'll start with the basics first. So education, if you look at the data over there, for as long as I can remember, I think the last 15 years, we've always been hearing that women are doing far better than men, that outcomes are better. 10th, 12th standard marks, if you look at the average, it has always been higher for women. We looked at the data then that the government of India publishes regarding this, and at all levels of education, it's not just primary and secondary, but at higher secondary and university level as well, the number of women enrolling per number of man has gone beyond 1, which means more women are getting enrolled in all levels of education. So now if you put that into context and see that these are the women who are getting into the education system and will be coming out better educated, better graduated, they obviously have a better chance of getting into the workforce and earning a lot more money. And in an economy like India's, which is 60% services, more brain type of jobs rather than brawn is required and is looked for. Women are in a very good position over here to get employed. As a result, if you look at the RBI data, in metro and urban areas, typically the areas where services economy is far stronger than any other place, women have more money in their bank accounts now. In metro areas, it is actually as high as 14%. So women have 14% more money.
So one pushback we got is this is men ka money only, but they in their infinite wisdom have tax बचाने के लिए some drama है. They put it in the women's bank. ऐसा सुनने को आया, right? Now, if that's the case, right, I'm not denying that this could be happening, right? Men are saving in their better half's name. Why would the time series not show this 10 years ago? Why is this a recent development? And similarly, by the way, mutual funds maybe the average woman ka
That is very true. Sorry.
mutual fund mein
Because first of all, so after demon, there was a lot of cash that needed to sort of be put around. So that clearly seems to be one reason that diverted into
men
started putting all that cash into newer accounts, which were all women accounts because they were unbanked or unaccounted.
Yeah.
This is one I'm just saying because we did a detailed story on this. This was something that came up through our thing. And the second portion is again the same thing after GST, because a lot of businesses got sidelined. They had cash, but their businesses got disrupted, and a lot of that cash poured also got back into the system through women accounts.
Right.
So this is something, the inflection point is like in 2016 onwards.
Good point.
This trend.
Good point. So
Sorry, my
it's
limited
a fair point that you're saying the double disruption, pehle demon, फिर GST is pushing money disproportionately into women's bank accounts. There's a couple of other factoids which are interesting, right? And perhaps they have a similar drive. Just move forward one slide, Nandita. So mutual fund ka data is very interesting, right? So mutual fund mein, I think this is slightly outdated. This data is now apparently 23. So women ka share of MF assets is now 23. But fascinatingly, the woman's typical investment in an MF is 25% more than a man's typical investment in an MF, right? Now, whether that has the sort of driver Mahalakshmi suggesting, I hadn't thought that through. Maybe it has, but I find it fascinating that both in bank accounts and in MF, average MF, women are doing more than men, and the gap is widening. That's what I find fascinating. The gap is widening between men and women. So it could well be there is some sort of parking dynamic. Let's call it a parking dynamic, but it could well be that there is an earnings dynamic as well.
Chandan Yojana money, all that money is coming into the women's account. Mudra loans, for instance, are going to women.
Urban. So rural may actually women deposits are smaller than men. This is RBI. So RBI segregates it by. So rural may women are still. So you see the rural ratios are 0.8, right? So rural women are still behind. It's in urban and metro that women are pulling ahead of men. And it could well be that there's a demon and
It is one factor in the we can favor women, like he's saying, all the other anecdotal
Now,
So I think one of the things, fair enough.
so there's another aspect, right? So now let's come to labor force participation rate, right? Our job is to join the dots, okay? So labor force participation rate 2019, female labor force participation rate 2019.
Was at the lowest, less than, I think 20 or 21 it
So this is
was.
before COVID. Is that before COVID? And nobody quite fully understands this thing, right? This is generates enormous debate. So FLFPR, female labor force participation rate, before COVID was 20%, right? And famously, बहुत सारे articles आए कि this is lower than Saudi Arabia, lower than Afghanistan, and so on. It's gone from 20 now to
37.2.
ठीक है. So in a country where there's a lot of discourse कि jobs नहीं है, why has FLFPR risen from 20 to 37.2? So here the pushback we received is कि definition ही change कर दिया. Whoever calculates the FLFPR definition ही change कर दिया, and they've called housework as labor force. Now again, if that's the case, then the whole thing becomes meaningless. Then तो फिर 100% है, right? Then we're all working all the time because we're all doing housework, right? So if the accusation is that the data is now fudged to include housework, then the FLFPR rises is a chimera. It's deceptive. But our job is to join the dots. So हम बोल रहे हैं MF का data देखो, bank account का data देखो, FLFPR का data देखो, and one of my favorite charts in this book, if you guys want to take a copy, feel free. Page 71 में there's a chart showing SC/ST women. Their educational enrollment rates have risen even faster than mainstream women, right? So I find that fascinating, right? This is government का All India Survey of Higher Education का data. SC/ST women's education is absolutely ripped, right? And I find that fascinating because if there is some sort of bias in the data, it should be equal bias for everybody, no? Why should it be more biased to one strata, so on? So the point that we believe that I think can be increasingly made. By the way, all of this what I'm telling you about, in the West, it's played out beautifully from 1980 to 2020. Women got more educated than men, women started earning more money than men, women have more savings than men, and so on and so forth. आगे जाओ next slide पे. Then this slide also, this chart, we also thought was fascinating. RBI data on delinquencies by gender. ठीक है? Now, while if a man borrows in his wife's name, वो default नहीं करता, but वो borrows in his own name, he defaults, right? That's some chivalry at a different level हो जाता है, right? So the gap is big. The gap is big when a woman is named as a borrower. Because one point of view we heard is, वो borrow तो actually man ही कर रहा है, just that he's named the woman as a borrower. If
but
that's
incentive, also there's all state governments and all, they give a 1%.
Fair enough. So our job is to make money, right? So what lenders have said it's a very powerful risk mitigator, having a woman ka name in the borrower category, right? So is that because the woman is getting sarkar se paisa and she is using that to repay the loan, the family is using that? Maybe that's a dynamic, which in turn links to another element of the rise of women. In elections now, more women vote than men.
Because all the state government now running this.
So, वो तो पैसा दे रहा है, right? The state government is not making the voting, not making the dole contingent on voting.
They're saying that keep voting. Money will continue.
So nicely put. We have said in the book there's a virtuous cycle that clever politicians have triggered. जैसे हम पैसा देंगे, आप vote करो, and for some reason people are voting. Women are voting more than men, and they're getting paid, and if that's resulting in these sorts of financial outcomes. The default rates for women are much lower than men, and they're saving more money and they're investing more in mutual funds. Then all power to them. But this is I think a distinctive aspect of the rise of modern India. So one of the reasons we loaded up on Trent 1.5 साल पहले, अभी भी बैठे हुए हैं वहाँ पे. We loaded up on Titan 5 साल पहले, अभी भी बैठे हुए हैं वहाँ पे. Is we reckon this metric, right, a woman pushing away, is very powerful, and you as journalists with access to plenty of data, I think will find fertile ground on this. Remember, money is only made when you challenge conventional wisdom. You can't make money by stating the bleeding obvious, right? So if you go and say we have a patriarchal conservative society, I don't think anybody is waiting to read that. वो किसी को खबर नहीं होगी कि India is a patriarchal conservative society. But if you say that the data increasingly suggests that in a patriarchal conservative society, women are rising, I think you'll find lots of takers. The chapter on women starts with, The issue came to light after a man, Sanjay, reported that his wife, Sunia, was missing after receiving the first tranche of rupees 40,000 of the scheme, right? Then preliminary investigation, that's remarkable, investigation हुआ. Preliminary investigation by the block development officer revealed that Sunia had eloped with an unknown person after taking the 40,000 installment recently released by the government. Subsequently, I think her father-in-law complains about this. Right? So I think all of this is coming together. पैसे मिल रहे हैं, वोट डाल रहे हैं, सेविंग्स हो रहा है, म्यूचुअल फंड हो रहा है, कुछ और भी हो रहा है, बट परहाप्स वो सिलेबस के बाद है. So it's a remarkable story. कवर कीजिएगा. There's going to be money to be made around this, right? तो ये पहला थीम है. आगे बढ़ते हैं, right? अब ये दूसरा थीम equally powerful है, because again you're seeing it in results, you're seeing it in consumption patterns, right? All credit to this man, remarkable book. पता नहीं कैसे लिखा. Whenever we meet Harish Damodaran, we sort of do a namaskar, because this man's book is outstanding. Write this in 2007, 2008. 2007 या 8 की किताब है, right? Incredible है. To say that the whole construct of the Indian elite is changing, to say that 17 साल पहले, I think is mind-blowing work, right? So I think he writes for the Express. Long may he continue writing, but it's a great book to read, because it tells you, at least told me, that the Indian elite is no longer the South Bombay types or the South Delhi types. The Indian elite is increasingly, as Nandita's data crunch shows, neither IIT, nor IIM, nor overseas educated. These people now run the country. They run India's most powerful companies, and increasingly, as we are finding, and skip the earnings piece because it is evident. Increasingly, as we are finding, they are SME owners who are in that 70,000 का category. ठीक है? So I'll just move back a little bit and give you data from this year's income tax. ठीक है? So हर साल सरकार जो income tax data छापती है, they report how many people are earning more than a crore, or how many people are reporting earned income of a crore or more. That number in FY14 was 40,000. This year it's 2,20,000. ठीक है? 1 crore or more की कमाई, 2,20,000, right? We are pretty confident that this 2,20,000 people who are reporting earnings of a crore or more, they include those 70,000 companies that are rocking. Those 70,000 companies, remember, 17% से company का profit grow कर रहा है, right? This constituency, let's call it roughly 3 lakh Indian families. Roughly 3 lakh Indian families, and roughly say a crore, roughly 3 lakh Indian families, roughly 1 million individuals. Their consumption is ripping through. Right? You can see that in quarterly results, you can see that in bikes, jewelry, premium shoes, anything premium continues to do well even right now. Right now, FMCG volume growth is 2%, passenger vehicle volume growth is 0%. But look up any premium item, आप BMW का sales देखिए, Mercedes का sales देखिए, Birkenstock का sales देखिए, right? आपको दिखेगा double digit volume growth, right? Why is that? Because this 3 lakh families, we call it octopus families, the new elite, income tax data में भी दिखता है, corporate tax data में होता है, the new elite, their incomes are ripping. Their incomes from not just the stock market, the incomes from the businesses are ripping. The challenge is middle class. If the elite, if women versus men way, the winner and loser is obvious. Elite versus middle class way, Nestle chairman has said so, Bhargava ji at Maruti has said so, that entry-level small cars is really struggling, and काफी लोग बोलते हैं SUV तो बिक रहा है ना, but our country is not so rich that the first car will be a SUV, right? I'm happy to be corrected, but मेरा जो perception है इंडिया में, people are not so rich for the first car to be an SUV. That means the entry-level car struggling is a sign of the middle class struggling. Now, there's enormous amount of data on this from the Western world. West में, so this is a guy called David Autor, A-U-T-O-R, David Autor. He's one of the most famous economists, labor economists. In fact, he's the world's most famous labor economist, David Autor. So David Autor ने ये दिखाया करीबन 6-7 साल पहले. So this is one of the most famous charts in labor economics. So David divided the Western labor force, Southern Europe, Northern Europe, North America, Japan. He divided the labor force into low skilled, middle skilled and high skilled. And he showed that middle skilled jobs have been decimated. Middle skilled jobs, so secretarial jobs, clerical jobs, right? Office jobs, factory jobs which can be automated have been decimated between 95 and 2015, right? This was one of the sort of foundational findings, almost a canonical finding, that when you automate a country, AI लाओ या basic automation ले आओ office में, factory में, the middle class is the casualty. Same is showing up in India in the annual survey of industries. Annual survey of industries में दिख रहा है, more than blue collar, it's the middle class which is getting squeezed. The managerial roles, right? Especially routine managerial roles are getting crunched, right? And it's going to come to all of us. हमारे finance में हो, media में हो, this is the challenge. AI, I think, exacerbates the challenge, right? AI exacerbates the challenge. Now, this is both a problem and an opportunity. आज के डेट में problem बहुत easily दिख रहा है, right? Problem बहुत easily दिख रहा है because we've all heard that बड़े-बड़े companies ने बोला है call centers बंद कर देंगे, बड़े-बड़े companies ने बोला है routine jobs को banks में, IT services में, IT में for example testing of software will be automated, right? So the downside story is clear. But let's dwell for a moment on the upside story. Reason for that is the upside story is what's made the West prosperous, and if we are going to prosper, we'll have to get the upside story going. So upside story क्या है? So let's take your profession, right? So a journalist job has many different components to it. Some parts are hard to automate. So for example, thinking of a news story idea and conceptualizing a news story idea, you can't say AI यार बता दे story क्या लिखना है, right? A smart journalist will think of a fresh story idea. That's the most creative aspect, more difficult to automate. What's easy to automate? Easy to automate is fact checking, grammar, शायद structuring of the paragraph as well. And आप लोगों को मुझसे बेहतर पता होगा, but I presume there's parts of the job which are kind of boring, routine, mundane. Now, in an ideal world, software should take away the boring stuff and leave only the interesting stuff. You will then, in that world, well, you only do the interesting stuff. You will write more stories, your employer will earn more money, and you will get paid more. When you get paid more, you will spend more, right? So your value add will go up because you are spending more of your time doing valuable things. आप boring stuff कम कर रहे हो और valuable things ज़्यादा कर रहे हो. So think of a lawyer, think of a investor, think of an analyst, think of a journalist. That's how technology. So the first effect where technology replaces labor is called the substitution effect. वो गंदी चीज़ है, dangerous है. And the second effect where your boring work is done by a machine and you only do interesting stuff is called the complementarity effect. We are searching, you are searching, all of us are searching in India for the complementarity effect. वो कहाँ पे है? Right? Where is it in journalism? Where is it in media? Where is it in finance? Where is it in IT services? Because वो complementarity effect नहीं आया, तो पंगा होगा. Right? Complementarity effect is what makes technology good for us rather than bad for us, right? So in the epilogue of the book, we have said that there is a certain way AI needs to work in India. We have made suggestions, but there are plenty of smart people who will read the book. Our request is you get them to read the epilogue of the book, because unless we are able to harness AI constructively in India, we will get hammered by the substitution effect, which is replacing human beings with machines. We will not be able to tap into the complementarity effect, right? And the result will be this middle class decimation, जो Nestle and Maruti chair people are speaking about, right? So again, look at the current downturn. Elite consumption problem नहीं है, mass consumption, middle class consumption, serious problem, right? And then the South India piece, I think we've discussed before. I think it's evident to a lot of people. But let me just quickly get into the political hot potato this is going to create. So we wrote this book 5 months ago. Penguin ने launch किया 2 महीने पहले. We anticipated this is going to be hot potato. I'm pretty sure it will be hot potato. क्यों? Because as I said, South is a quarter of the population, half the GDP, which means half the taxes, and 2/3 of the GDP growth. So अमित शाह जी ने बोला है 25 में सेंसस होगा, as per the constitution 26 में delimitation होगा. Delimitation मतलब population के basis पे फिर से parliamentary seats are going to get redone. At the moment, the seat allocation in Lok Sabha is as per the 71 census. 71 में South had accounted for a third of the population. Around the mid-90s, South का population stopped growing, right? So there's a remarkable chart. Ananta, you want to talk us through that remarkable chart?
Yeah, so basically this is on the left hand side axis the nominal per capita income for the 7 peninsular states. So that includes Maharashtra, Goa, Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra and Telangana. So that's the average per capita income, and you see it rocket through the years in the last 10 to 20 years. But if you look at the total fertility rate, that has only gone down. So there is a remarkably, a strongly
So replacement,
negative relationship.
replacement 1.8 पे replacement होता है या 2 पे replacement होता है?
2 पे replace
Right?
होता है, that has already
replacement
reached.
तो भूल जाओ, replacement तो last century में stop हो गया South का. Around 98, 99, South stopped replacing population, right? But the remarkable thing, right? We don't have a full explanation for it. People who are sociologists is see the southern fertility rate is dropping like a stone, right? And this means that when they do the census next year, this means that when they do the census next year, it's highly likely South ka population, rather than being a third, will end up being somewhere around a quarter of the country. So they're a quarter of the country, but they're half the tax collections. Will they agree to the redrawing of the political map? And you can see the chief ministers have already started opining on this. It's probably a little too late to try to say, oh, red line ko upar karo, right? I mean, I don't know when the census will be, but it's you can see, right? It's a T20 match now, but red line is a challenge, right? And I can't fully explain to you. I don't have the necessary background to tell you why has the most prosperous part of India seen such a sharp decline in the fertility rate, and this is why living in India is so much fun. You got profound changes happening in front of you, but nobody has any idea kyun hua hai.
Actually, it's quite remarkable because this is happening in the Western countries where you would expect this to happen because they're in the third or fourth phase of their demography transition. But in India, at $2,000 of per capita income,
European levels of fertility में पहुंच गया South India, right? South India का per capita $4,000 है.
Yeah.
Europe का
Fair enough.
मानो 1/8, right? South India is now at European levels of fertility. We don't have any explanation why that is, but it has profound implications for the political setup. And 2026 में काफी गर्मा गर्मी होगी. And then just covering off what I think will be is a big opportunity already कमा रहे हैं with a little bit of help from the new hero of the United States और कमाएंगे, right? So हमने discuss किया है China plus one, right? In the book we have shown that China plus one, 3 colossal themes around it. पहला है API, active pharmaceutical ingredient, दवाई. दूसरा है smartphones, right? We discussed Apple. And तीसरा है medical devices. So we will load it up as much as we can. And again, folks, it's very clear. अगर इस क्वार्टर के अर्निंग्स देखो, चाइना प्लस वन थीम में अर्निंग्स में कोई पंगा नहीं है. चाइना प्लस वन थीम में अर्निंग्स में कोई पंगा नहीं है, राइट? व्हाट वी आर होपिंग टू डू इज if this 60% levy 60% levy that the incoming president has spoken about, if that indeed comes through, I think we'll see an exponential jump in this opportunity, right? Beyond us, whatever other China plus one investments other investors have made have also flourished, but I think this story की शुरुआत है. Trump has also announced his trade secretary, a guy called Lighthizer, who's supposed to be a trade hawk, right? So one of the most hawkish people on trade. वो previous administration में भी था, and obviously the 60% number तो is well known. So if the new administration is hostile to China in certain areas where the West needs essential supplies, दवाई, medical devices, phones and pads, we'll end up becoming a substantial part of the ecosystem. अभी तो शुरुआत है स्टोरी का. Our reckoning is $300 billion का economic activity बन सकता है. So 7-8% addition to GDP over the next couple of years, meaningful accretion to GDP growth. And lastly, the GCC's theme, we've discussed it before, it will carry on. It's interesting in these US presidential elections, there wasn't that much heartburn about office jobs going to India. थोड़ा सा चिल्ला चिल्ली था, but nobody really beat themselves up. Why? Because the people who work in offices are not a vote bank that people lost a lot of sleep about. So in our global portfolio as well, so we have this company called Constellation. It's one of the most original software companies in the world. So Constellation का बहुत सारा काम actually India में होता है. It's a Toronto listed software company, but a big part of the work actually happens in Bangalore. Microsoft, again part of our global portfolio, famously large campus in Gachibowli in Hyderabad, right? And then just to link this through to पंगा कहाँ पे हो रहा है, just to be very blunt, We just like WESCO is the positive acronym, caged is the challenge wala acronym, right? Caged ka challenge is kya? Pehla challenge, which we've spoken about in the book, is we're actually a high cost structure country. Our labor is expensive, our land is expensive. For our stage of development, हमारा per capita income है $2,500. For a very poor country, we are amongst the 50 poorest nations in the world. Our land, labor and capital actually is very expensive. And that makes it very difficult for us to add value in labor intensive products. जहाँ पे दिमाग का इस्तेमाल है, जहाँ पे टेक्नोलॉजी का इस्तेमाल है, साइंस का इस्तेमाल है, we can export. IT, pharma, right? But when there is no use of grey cells, it's very difficult for us to compete because our costs are pretty high for a poor country, right? Second is, as we've discussed, AI. This is, I think, a massive threat, right? This can potentially wreck middle class India. We've seen the beginnings of it. I think the folks who run our country, I think they need to do what they call a mission mode response to this. Epilogue of the book suggests mission mode strategies for AI. To be fair to the authorities, the chief economic advisor's economic survey had clearly said that this is going to be a massive issue. What we haven't seen is the policy response to this. Thirdly, jobs. North and east में population है. North and east में population है. The GDP growth is south, right? And again, actually AI, we've given an AI solution. How you can take job seekers in the north, job providers in the south, and how AI can bring them together, right? Environment. Right? We keep saying that we are a poor country, the West is rich, they should bear the burden, but we are also a very ecologically sensitive country. Right? We have an ecologically sensitive coastline. So for example, West Bengal, half the coastline gets eroded. Half the coastline is getting eroded in the state I was born in. Similarly, I'm sure you've read the stories about subsidence in the Himalayas and whole towns getting wiped out through subsidence in the Himalayas. The pollution issues in the north are well known. Do we really have an environmental setup which can sustain 6-7% growth? It's not evident to us that that's as easy. By the way, the rising food prices are one manifestation of environmental challenges. We have hotter and hotter summers followed by very heavy floods. You naturally create a food cycle problem. And last as we discussed, delimitation, hot potato coming towards us. Right? So it's not a book intended to be a kind of cheerleading karo. It's a book intended to say the rise of India is very unusual. This is very strange. There's so many aspects of this that are unusual, that South ka rise and the southern fertility decline is one of those. If we understand more of these dimensions on which India is unique, we'll be able to succeed better as investors. So I'll stop there. If you have questions, fire away. We'll try to answer as many as we can. Neha will look to you to say कहाँ पे रुकना है. हाँ जी बोलिए.
Hi, Advait from Bloomberg. So just one of the many explanations for the election results this year was that you've seen massive equity growth. Equity markets have boomed. People have made money. There are more billionaires, but there are also lots of people on subsistence, need food rations and things. This is an economic model we've pursued for about 40 years now, where you have infrastructure development, landless labor moves out, they're not rehabilitated, you have all of these issues. Do you think that in the last 40 years, as the GDP has grown, as the more wealthy and companies have grown, so has the budget for social welfare? Do you think that needs to continue, and where do you see our expenditure on social welfare if the middle class needs support? And when I say middle class, I'm talking about people who don't turn up on the income tax data. Right? Majority of people in that data list aren't filing taxes. How do you see social welfare between states and...
One of the points we make, right, in chapter 3 of the book is where we've done very well in India is, by and large, if you take a 50-year sweep, economic reforms have been fairly steady. Economic reforms have been fairly steady, and they've been pretty effective. Right? Mahalakshmi referred to GST. Right? It's a massive economic reform, and it's been pretty effective. Right? Where we are a little perplexed, and we say as much in the book, is if you look at government spending on healthcare as a percentage of GDP, and government spending on education as a percentage of GDP, right? Those two aspects, given that we are a democracy, you would have expected government spending on healthcare and education to be far higher. Instead, what we have shown is in the 70 years of independence, we've reached till 1.1% of GDP, right? 1.1% of GDP is spending on healthcare, and 3% is spending on education as a percentage of GDP. The education number actually has come down over time, which is perplexing. The healthcare number for a very poor country is strangely low. We've said this is slightly strange. This is a democracy where politicians are going to the voters and seeking votes. We'd expect them to ramp on healthcare and education. It hasn't happened. Other countries at our level of per capita income seem to be spending more, and it is a perplexing area. We'll see what the February budget brings. My reading is, given what Nirmala Sitharaman ji said in the July budget, I think you're likely to see RevX. You're likely to see healthcare, education become a bigger priority. You're also seeing that in the assembly elections that are underway in Maharashtra, right? You can be seeing the social component kick in. The tricky part for a politician is to focus on health and education, which have long-term payoffs, rather than near-term.
Sure, there's also cash handouts and things like that.
Yes, so the cash handout, how useful that is, right? Most employers we speak to get very, very distressed about cash handouts, because they say it immediately tightens up the labor market. Whereas health and education, if you spend on that, it doesn't hurt the labor market today, it has long-term payoffs. The challenge for a politician is, if I spend on health and education today, payoff 10 saal baad aaye, how am I going to get any benefit? And I'm not so sure I have any answers to that, but it's a real challenge, and it's perplexing that compared to other democracies at our stage of development, we're spending less on health and education.
I think we have better programs today, whether it's Jan Dhan Yojana or the Ayushman Bharat, certainly a better program and the way they make it, but how do you take the 5 lakh premium and make it a 10 lakh cover for a family? That's the question, whether we have state capacity to do that.
Yeah. And I think there's 2 metrics we should all keep looking at. One is rural real wages, right? That's, I think, a very useful metric. And the second is FMCG consumption in rural India. The latter has shown a little bit of an improvement, but the rural real wages number is still not firing. And that's, I think, that's something which is still worrying us. For a decade or so, we've had now stagnant rural real wages.
So just on corporate earnings, so obviously we've seen earnings decline. You're saying that the middle rung companies are doing much better than the top 900 companies that we know of. How far do you think the earnings growth will decline, because companies that are growing are not reflected in the, let's say, MSCI index, for instance?
So let's get into the nitty-gritty a little bit more, right? If you see the corporate earnings, private capex actually hasn't done badly. Private capex companies' earnings have actually held up, double-digit EPS growth you can see in private capex companies. Government capex has struggled, but that seems to be because post-elections, or during the elections and post-elections, there was a bit of a cough in government capex, right? So it's very intriguing that private capex companies are coming through nicely. Earnings growth is coming through nicely. Cummins being a case in point, right? Cummins is a simple bellwether genset banata hai. So when Cummins has healthy earnings and they're saying gensets are selling in larger numbers, office demand is also holding up, right? So I think what that is telling me is something very simple. Indian corporate balance sheets are at its best shape ever. Indian household balance sheets are probably at one of their worst shape in perhaps a generation. So RBI का data अगर आप लो, and you do net household financial savings. Net matlab whatever they're saving minus whatever they're borrowing, right? That metric, net household financial savings.
It's a 40, 50 year low.
It's a 40 or a 50 year low on that, right? I think it's a 40 year low on that. Okay. So household balance sheets are struggling. Corporate balance sheets are in great shape. We also know private sector banks tier 1 is in great shape. My reading is we are beginning a private sector capex upturn. We've been waiting for it for many years. But अगर हम results देखें, दिख रहा है private sector capex upturn. Providers of private capex equipment, Cummins being a case in point, दिख रहा है numbers are holding up nicely. We will need them to fire, which means capex शुरू होगा, private capex शुरू होगा. At one remove then the job creation cycle fires. Because you first need private capex, then you create jobs. So private capex fires first, jobs fire and then I think consumption, urban consumption starts improving, right? So how quickly will this cycle take place? My reckoning is we're looking at multiple quarters. I don't think we can say agle quarter things will miraculously improve, but if you were to take the positives out of this earnings season, The positives are clear. Private capex oriented companies are holding up nicely, which means private capex is happening, which means with a lag, jobs are going to get created, which means those tattered household balance sheets will start getting repaired shortly.
Yes, sir. Anurag, sir, this side 80 now. Sir, you just said that elite class is growing, middle class is shrinking, and the
Middle class is suffering.
Suffering.
आवाज बढ़ रही है, but income में.
Suffering, and poor are also getting impacted, and with the cash handouts, employers are not happy, but most of the states are now giving cash handouts, and going ahead it will increase only. So do you think that cash handout is at least helping in narrowing the little bit of gap, or helping in the consumption drive at least?
Look, let me put it this way. From a perspective of someone who's fighting elections, they need results sooner rather than later. If you and I go to them and say, "आप education चालू कर दो," so he will say, "education चालू करूँगा, फायदा तो 12 साल बाद दिखेगा." What's going to happen in the interim, right? And that's why in the epilogue of the book, we've said India Stack 1 has worked, right? India Stack, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, mobile, and UPI has worked. We've then said if you integrate India Stack 1 with AI, you can solve a whole lot of issues without spending a ton of money on subsidies. So for example, right, if you have say a meso 17-year-old school student who wants to study physics in college, but she doesn't have the money, right? Through AI and Ek Step, Nandan Nilekani ji and Rohini Nilekani ji's foundation, Ek Step has created the basic tech solution as well. Through AI, the meso girl should be able to speak into a phone and say, I'm looking to study physics in college. I'm happy to do an internship and work part-time and study part-time. मेरे को scholarship चाहिए. And she might speak in her mother tongue into the AI. In that AI database will be all employers, internship seekers, scholarship providers. And AI will then match this meso aspirant's needs with जो भी provide करने के लिए तैयार है. Maybe say an employer in Bangalore says, you do a 4-year internship with me on my shop floor, I will pay for your physics education at Indian Institute of Science, right? Now, the solution can be built. The science is straightforward. Three constituencies have to put their hand up. Firstly, first constituency has to say, I will provide the training data. I will pay for the training data to be gathered. Remember, इस bot को train करने के लिए, you need thousands of students, thousands of job seekers, education seekers in different languages to give their training data. You'll also need employers to give their needs and scholarship providers to give their needs, right? CSR foundations. So somebody has to pay for the bot to be trained. Secondly, एक बार bot trained हो गई, somebody has to pay for the GPU burn. Remember, unlike India Stack 1 में जब नंदिता uses Digi Yatra at Bombay Airport, कोई extra खर्चा नहीं होता किसी का. But India Stack 2 में अगर AI आ गया, every time an aspirant asks for a scholarship, there's a GPU burn. Right? वो NVIDIA का chip हो, किसी का भी हो, कोई खर्चा हो, chip में burn है, power का खर्चा है. Somebody has to put their hand up and say, I'm going to pay for that GPU burn. ठीक है? And third, somebody is going to pay for the marketing. Because ये बना के प्रचार करना है, लोगों को समझाना है. तो जैसे हमने स्किलिंग एंड एम्प्लॉयमेंट का समझाया, वैसा ही सोल्यूशन मेरे ख्याल से हेल्थ केयर में भी है. It's clear from our travels that diabetes and hypertension is rocketing through the roof, not just in urban India, rural India में hypertension और diabetes का बड़ा challenge है. Ayushman Bharat is a good intervention, but the needs are vast. I think AI can help there. And similarly in the case of farmer subsidies, farmer grants. So if our policy makers are willing to bring in a tech intervention which enhances India Stack and takes it to India Stack 2, then that money can be spent more constructively. And मेरे ख्याल से उसके returns भी फटाफट आ जाएंगे, short term में आ जाएंगे. It's slightly more long term than giving cash in hand, but I think it is more constructive for the country. And if we don't do that, then the consequences are दिख रहा है, right? क्या होगा अगर नहीं करेंगे तो? स्क्रीन पर दिख रहा है आपको झांकी दिख रही है भविष्य की, अगर इस प्रकार का इंटरवेंशन ना आए. Any other questions, folks?
So I was quite surprised to see that tourism is not a part of the prominent themes that you mentioned, especially when the government is promoting tourism so heavily with so many several campaigns running around. So I mean, why is that so?
I mean, look, I think tourism should be a job creator, but for tourism to work out, we need a bunch of other interventions. So we were looking for themes in the book where courtesy China's aggression, China's belligerence, Western companies are forced to come to India, and the China plus one themes therefore are around aspects of Western security, tech security, food security, tech security, medical security, aspects of Western security where they're compelled to come to India because they're feeling disturbed about China's belligerence, right? I think tourism is a good theme, it creates jobs, but there's a bunch of other things that need to happen for us to be tourist friendly, and those are themes that have to require state government work, local government work, and our book, whilst I would love to believe our book will be widely read, I'm not so sure our book will be on the desk of every local government and state government civil servant, and hence that coordinated response that you need to drive tourism, maybe it's a while away, right? And all of you travel extensively around the country. The coordinated response we need to bring in tourists, I'm not so sure that's easy to drive through in a country like ours.
I think the climate factor is also a very big hindrance over there as far as the whole theme is concerned, because you see a lot of these, Delhi is basically unlivable during winters. There's a lot of floods and a lot of, landslides that happen in the northern part of the country. So then it becomes very, very difficult to have a national level policy which can sort of be applied to everywhere. You need to have very, calibrated policies, which will take a lot of effort, honestly. So, I mean, it doesn't make sense at a pan-India level with one blanket.
If somebody does it, I think all of us will be happy, just that we might have to book a little bit earlier. But that being said, did you guys look at Indian Hotels' results? I thought fascinating, right? We were talking about a slowdown, and again, I'm going back to the same mudda, middle class versus elite. Indian Hotels' result देखिए, spanking beautiful results, right? Room rates, average room rates up, utilization up. 5-star hotels are chock-a-block. So already the 5-star hotels are chock-a-block. अगर और विदेशी आ जाएंगे, where will us folks go यार?
So coming back to the corporate.
Mike,
Coming back to the corporate earnings, so are we kind of going to see a few more quarters of pain especially in some of these sectors?
Explain the sequence, right? Explain the sequence to you. First, we need employers to do capex. वो jobs create करेंगे. Then job seekers will get into those jobs, and then they will consume. Now, this sequence of events seems to be underway because capex-oriented companies, private sector capex providers, they have reported pretty good results. उनके मुझे कोई slowdown दिख नहीं रहा है. Consumption में slowdown दिख रहा है, government capex slowdown दिख रहा है, but private capex encouragingly there's no slowdown. Plus, you and I have the factoid that corporate India's balance sheet is in great shape, right? So this sequence has begun. How long it will take for the train to reach the station? How long it will take for people to get jobs and then earn enough to stimulate consumption? It's not an easy answer. I can give you off the bat. We'll need to do some more work, but it looks like it's going to be a few quarters.
So from a capital market perspective, what is your sense now if you look at 6 months, 12 months down the line, how do you see?
So it depends on which segment. So again, if it's a private sector capex centric company, I would love to be able to buy them 30% cheaper, but it's not evident to me वो 30% cheaper उपलब्ध क्यों होगा. But on the other hand, as is obvious, because the consumption theme has got a real pounding, I think over the next 6 months, more bargains open up in high quality consumption plays, and it will require a degree of nerve because अगर 2-3 quarter weak consumption आया and these stocks get beaten up further, it will require a degree of nerve. But if you believe that fundamentally the country is not fallen apart, fundamentally things are in the right direction, it's just that the post-COVID revenge spending era has gone, and now we need to create middle class jobs again for middle class consumption to be boosted. If you believe that cycle will restart, I believe that. I don't believe the middle class jobs will कभी create नहीं होंगे, and I believe in the complementarity effect. I believe that say in your sector, in the media sector, AI will do the drudgery wala jobs and journalists will do more and more exciting stuff. You'll write 1500 word pieces which people will pay premium amounts for, etc. Right? I think the complementarity effect will kick in, but time lagega for the complementarity effect to kick in rather than the substitution effect. And similarly, I think time lagega for the private sector capex cycle which has started to create jobs, and therefore we're looking at a few quarters of soft prints on consumption, which will result in cheaper consumption stocks. Since consumption in our country, consumption companies in our country tend to be unlevered. They tend to be unlevered, they tend to be reasonably free from government intervention. I think we're potentially going to get real bargains in 2026 on consumption-centric stocks. I think there's a gentleman at the back, he wants to ask a question. No, piche.
Hi, Saurabh. You nicely articulated the pain points, but do you think the economic growth, the overall headline number, belies all these, like poor earnings or,
So look, I think the tax take is the tax collections are a good reality check. No? The tax collections are what they are. I think we can't sort of say the tax collection data is there's something wrong with it. And the tax collection data is very interesting. That direct tax numbers are very punchy. So the direct tax numbers are punchy. That suggests to me that the economic growth numbers are by and large in the right ballpark. I don't have the locus standi to say something whether they are right to the second decimal place. But the direct tax collection numbers, both on corporate and especially in individual income tax collections, are suggestive of a reasonably healthy economy. Right? So again, I'll go back to that income tax data ka factoid. Individuals reporting 1 crore or more ka income, right? 40,000 10 years ago, 2,20,000 now, and pretty steady every year. Around the count of people reporting 1 crore or more, every year the number is rising by around 10%, 15%, right? So solid number, 15% se agar aapka number of 1 crore more rises, right? Now what is that telling me? It's telling me that the people who run the country are clearly getting richer. That's something I think you're seeing in consumption as well, right? Luxury cars, luxury anything is still rocking. But as the power law suggests, that the people who are running the country, they are killing it. The masses are falling behind. And that's the reality. And I think the GDP data reflects the prosperity and the rise of the elite class, the octopus class. Because the middle classes are struggling, a lot of us gripe with the GDP data, but the tax collection data is suggesting that GDP data is by and large in the right ballpark. And again, coming at it from a different angle, Sami, the Government of India data on corporate taxes is showing that the top 900 companies have faster growth than next 6,000. Top 900 is the stock market, but the faster growth is the next 6,000. And CMI ka data set is also showing the fastest profit growth is in the second decile, not the first decile. So number of ways I'm attacking the problem, which suggests the economy is in better shape than the stock market is.
But the bottom 6,000 won't move the needle much, right? Because 900
So remember, this is the bottom 6,000 out of 1.4 million companies. So top 900 account for 60% of PAT. The next 6,000, top 900 account for 60% of PAT. Next 6,000 account for 25% of PAT. That 25% is rocking. They're roaring away. This is using government ka corporate tax data. Using CMI Praves ka data, the second decile is roaring away. The top decile, which is primarily the stock market, is having a much more sedate time. So the structure of the economy seems to have toggled a little bit away from the stock market. And then at the income level, at the individual level, the elite seems to be getting a disproportionate share of the spoils. Which is why the dissonance a lot of people feel with the GDP growth data, the dissonance that a lot of people feel, perhaps isn't as justified as they would like it to be. You see what I mean? A lot of people feel, yaar, mera life to aise grow nahi kar raha. The dissonance that they feel is because they are not seeing the fruits of this sort of power law driven economic growth.
Fair point. Another thing, this FY25 Nifty companies earnings growth could be flattish. Do you think the post-pandemic boom and the kind of stimuluses that we had also now waning out, is that also a reason behind tepid earnings growth?
So FY25 I don't think will be flat. I think will be somewhere in the high single digits. Clearly the current quarter So let's do it sequentially. Q1, excluding the banks, it was a flat quarter. This time around, including the banks, it looks like it will be flat to slightly negative. If the banks carry on firing, touch wood, let's hope the financial piece carries on firing, we'll probably end up with low single digits, EPS growth in 25, right? Now you're asking, what does that suggest? Does that suggest the post-pandemic boom has? The revenge spending piece clearly has. Revenge spending piece is ebbed, right? Now think of it in three more contexts. Fiscal policy was incredibly stimulating through the pandemic, rightly so, right? And even in the first couple of years after the pandemic, courtesy the capex spends, the government kept the stimulus hot, the fiscal stimulus hot. For obvious reasons, they have taken that stimulus out of the system, right? And I think pretty clear that we'll see more of that in 1st Feb 26, because there's no need to stimulate. If inflation is running at 5% and Cummins is reporting booming demand for gensets, आपको center से fiscal stimulus देने की ज़रूरत नहीं, right? So fiscal policy has turned contractionary, revenge spending piece is gone. Let's come to the RBI. When through 2022 and 23, the Fed hiked by 500 bips, the RBI hiked by 250 bips. Right? The RBI hasn't yet turned expansionary. By and large, till recent, I think monetary policy is now neutral. Right? Until the RBI turns expansionary, until fiscal policy turns expansionary, it's not obvious to me why we come out of the cyclical downturn. We had 3 good years for the economy, 22, 23, 24 good years for the economy. Now we have a cyclical downturn. Right? Cyclical downturn, I don't think the world is going to fall apart. We will come out of the cyclical downturn because the macro fundamentals are pretty decent. Capex is happening. I think the job creation cycle will kick up. Will it be 2 quarters? Will it be 4? Will it be 6? That number I can't give you. Right? Partly it depends on how much the RBI does. My belief is they should move sooner rather than later on monetary stimulus. I think they should move sooner rather than later. The Fed is doing its piece. I think the RBI should also move sooner rather than later on rate cuts, and also depends on what we see in the 1st February budget in terms of helping the economy recover, especially on the jobs front. The economic survey, the previous economic survey suggested that the authorities are awake and alive to the disruption caused in the labor market by skilling and AI. Will there be a policy response? I'm hoping there will be.
Hi. One thing on the earnings slowdown I wanted to ask. So you said one of the reasons for the earnings slowdown is because the players who are in the challengers, so they're giving a tough competition to the companies who are in the ruler category.
Yeah, I used the demand versus quick commerce by example.
Right. So do you think that this slowdown is going to continue unless these companies who are in the challenger space, they come to the market and get listed? So do you feel that's going to happen?
I see what you're getting at. So thankfully, inside Zomato is a large quick commerce company. Inside Swiggy is another large quick commerce company, right? And Pramod, Reliance is also announced a quick commerce company, right? So, and I think these are unless someone tells me otherwise, these are the 3 largest. Zepto. So Zepto bahar hai, but by and large, core of quick commerce is inside. So hopefully, given that Swiggy is now listed, Zomato the listed Thai, and Reliance का announcement आ गया है that they're gonna invest heavily in QCom. Hopefully you see the QCom piece in the stock market piece. And on a more general point, given that we have a booming stock market, and given that investment bankers have a vested interest in IPOing those 6,000 companies, I think private equity and the investment banking community in Bombay is going to rush for those 6,000 companies and load up on as many of those. I wish we had a private equity fund. We don't, but we'll wait for the stock market IPOs. I think the free market ecosystem will respond pretty quickly to that. So let's put it like this, there's a jobs response, capex and jobs response, which seems to be underway, looking at the capex companies' results. And then there's a capital markets response, which is जाके 6,000 अच्छे कंपनी हैं. By the way, these 6,000 companies PAT is between 50 से 500 करोड़.
Yes.
ठीक है, 6,000 कंपनी है, lower end पे हमारे जैसे होंगे, upper end पे 500 करोड़ का PAT है. So very IPOable, very private equity esque, right? And I think PE and stock market is going to make a beeline for this, and therefore the IPO pipeline should stay reasonably buoyant over the next several years. So it will solve itself. I don't think we should say ये earnings का degrowth आ गया और उन्हें बैठ जाओ. Right? This is a cyclical downturn. It had to happen at some stage. It's happened now. There's a macroeconomic response. There's a capital markets response, and hopefully there'll be a policy response as well from the folks in Wind Road and in North Block. Just let Mahalakshmi have a go. Go on, Mahalakshmi, go first, you got the mic.
So I have 2 or 3 questions, Saurabh. So the first question is related to what Srishti was asking. You made this comparison between DMart and quick commerce. No, we see this playing out across several companies, right? Like Asian Paints yesterday, maybe because of competition's intensity, maybe because of slowdown, it's hard to say. But my question to you around this is, you've always batted for companies like DMart, HDFC Bank, Asian Paints, all of which have very strong moats over many, many years. They have fantastic capital allocation policy, great managements in essence, and you've believed that anybody who generates cash flows with great capital allocation by management, they know what they're doing and they will always be able to take newer opportunities and create growth for the future. Are you disturbed by this trend, and are you revisiting your investment thesis around this in any way, because we are seeing the stark difference between the rural category and the challenger category? So what's your own investment insight and strategy around this? That's question number 1. Second question is around mass consumption. You used like all these mental models like power of law, etc., to explain why mass consumption is low. So is mass consumption an uninvestable theme structurally for India? Because at least post-COVID, we've seen the surge in savings, luxury, polarization, all of that.
So as ever, Mahalakshmi asks very searching questions. Let me try to link the question, right? It is, I think, indisputable, Mahalakshmi, that in the last 4-5 years, the structure of the economy has changed radically compared to what it was in the, say, 2010 se 2017-18, right? Or 2008 to 18, what the construct of the economy was. In the last 5-6 years, it's changed. Now, why it's changed, the book has its hypothesis, but you and I could debate till the cows come home, क्यों economy change किया. What's clear is it has changed, right? And again, if you read the book, read the last chapter, Creative Destruction, you'll see, using Government of India data, how radically in the last 4-5 years, the structure of profitability alters in India. Okay? So the old laws which held good from 8 to 18, in the last 5-6 years have dropped away. There is churn in the economy, there is challenge in the economy, and the challengers going after the rulers, the decile 2 outperforming decile 1, is clearly become more routine, more normal today than it was a decade ago. So that's the first part. Is that something we are incorporating into investments? Absolutely it is. So for 2 years we stayed at home due to COVID. Diwali 21 we stepped out. By Diwali 22, my dimag had exploded. So I told Nandita that ये जो देश है, this is very different from the country of 5 years ago. That's what actually led to the book. Between Diwali 21 when we stepped out, Diwali 22, I felt almost like it was a new country. Right? I said, forget my telling the foreign investors क्या करना है. We need to first understand and explain to Indians how dramatically the country has changed. Right? And even then you can see when we try to pursue it, if women are dominating, the patriarchal response is ऐसा तो नहीं होता, right? So the country has changed. Are we changing? Of course we are. So if you look at our portfolios over the last 1.5 years, we have refreshed them radically. We're trying to bring in themes like women, rent being an example. We're trying to bring in the challenger franchises, especially in many sectors, but say capital goods. Tube being a capital goods challenger franchise. Tube का जो clean mobility piece है, is a challenger franchise. We're trying to bring the South India aspect through in as many of our portfolios. So not just the large cap, but in small cap as well. भर के South India कर रहे हैं. And if I look back at the last couple of years, now whenever I sell a high quality South Indian stock early, Whenever I sell a high quality South Indian stock early, I live to regret the decision, right? Because the economic buoyancy in South India is at such a level that for us who don't live there, it's actually hard to understand kya ho raha hai, right? So the country is changing, we are reflecting it in our portfolio. Addressing your question on HDFC Bank, Asian Paints, right? So the demarcation we're drawing, Mahalakshmi, is between industries which are heavily regulated, where there are natural barriers to entry. So anything around RBI regs is hard for dynamism to go beyond a point, because you can't set up a bank. And even in NBFCs, we've seen the regulator being very clear that they don't want wild behavior in the NBFC ecosystem. So there the incumbents seem to be on a stronger footing. So both HDFC Bank's ROEs, their ability to stabilize the franchise after the acquisition, or say Bajaj Finance or Chola, right, kind of large investments in banks and NBFCs, we feel that we are on reasonably solid footing, because the regulator creates a degree of, a degree of stability around competitive intensity. Where that's not the case, and paints is a good case in point, where that's not the case, it's clear that there is a degree of competitive intensity ramp up that we're trying to understand and benefit from. We've succeeded in some instances, so I would say, I think Astral Poly has been a reasonably successful investment. We are hoping that Escorts Kubota will be a successful investment. We think the Japanese can turn Kubota into a Maruti and give the incumbent, in this case the incumbent would be M&M, a run for its money. We think Eicher Motors, especially in the trucks piece, right, where Eicher Motors is incumbent in luxury bikes and they only have one reasonable rival, the Java Yazdi people. But Volvo Eicher is a challenger in the trucks piece, and the data is very clear. Sian ka data hai, and they've done a good job. So we're trying our best to identify companies which are challengers, but yet they are well-run high-quality franchises. We seem to be getting more right than wrong, but it's clearly investing today is a far more, dynamic activity than it was in that 8 to 18, 10-year period, where by and large the winners kept winning every year. This ecosystem of the chotus coming through is creating enormous competitive intensity, and I think it's a good thing. It makes our investing companies that much more awake, alive to the challenges. In the past, we would have to go and nag. Now, a 25 or 30-year-old entrepreneur with private equity or VC money is saying, I'm going to light a fire under your franchise, and we don't have to do the nagging. The next generation is setting up a fire underneath the dominant franchises. So it's just
and how do you play this? I mean, for example, like a company like Asian Paints, you would still hold something and then take a challenger also. I don't know if there is a strict challenger to that. But even in case of DMart,
yeah.
or
so I think let's look at it like this, right? So just to simplify the construct, companies which are able to preempt the challenge are better to invest in than companies who wait for the challenger to come and beat them up. Secondly, companies who are able to understand that my core franchise will get challenged, so let me hit up an adjacency, are better. So say Titan buying Carrot Lane in 2017, I thought with the real time I thought it was aggressive. Post facto, I think for Bhaskar Bhatt and for Bhaskar Bhatt ji to buy Carrot Lane in 2017 was a genius idea. You're an incumbent in conventional jewelry retailing. You play the disruptor by buying the finest online jewelry retailing franchise. So look for companies who are proactive in saying, I know that what I currently do could be attacked, so I'll hit up an adjacency. To be fair to Asian Paints, they've tried to do that. It's just that I think the Birla Opus attack on the core franchise is overshadowing Asian Paints' ability to, Asian Paints' effort to build a broader home decor franchise. So look for companies that preempt attacks on the core by building out good adjacencies, and at the same time, if you want to be a step further, look for promoters who look for utterly disruptive, almost VC type ideas to start new businesses that have never been started before in India. So if I look at Tube and Clean Mobility, doing clean mobility simultaneously, doing EVs simultaneously for three-wheelers, light trucks, heavy trucks, tractors, I think is pretty unprecedented. Nobody in India is doing 4 EV businesses simultaneously. The three-wheeler one is already a market leader. Montra, Tube's three-wheeler play is already a a market leader, right? So that sort of promoter, a Valiant type promoter, who's saying, I'll defend my core, which is tube cut traditional auto ancillary business, but I'll also hit up an adjacency by buying CG. I think they announced yesterday on the QIP, no? They're raising more capital. I suspect kuch na kuch hoga wahan pe, given that they are smart people. And then they're saying we'll do something utterly VC-esque. Venture capitalist ki tarah hum jaake, we will build 4 businesses. In fact, not just EVs, they've also set up a mobile camera manufacturing business. We've also set up a medical devices manufacturing business, right? So that sort of promoter is ideal because as Tube puts it, Reliant puts it, there's Tube 1, the Purana core, Tube 2, the acquisitions, and Tube 3, the VC bets. If वैसा मिल जाए तो, सोने पे सुहागा, hopefully in your publications, we will read about plenties of companies of this caliber. But you can see what I'm getting at, right? It requires a new generation of promoters who are that much hungrier, harder working, open to new ideas, and in a way that, in that regard, Mahalakshmi, there's a generational change.
So the winners and the modes of the past need to be taken with a pinch of salt, and you need to sort of revisit.
The winners and the modes of the past need to be reality checked, or can they deal with the more vibrant India that we find ourselves in today versus 10 years ago.
Yeah, and actually answering your question on mass consumption, I think I'm just going to repeat what Saurabh has said, that private capex, as he rightly mentioned, the companies are doing a lot of things, and we'll see that effect, but it will be a little while until the jobs are created. Unless and until that income factor is not sorted out, I think consumption will always follow that income factor. So it will be some time. I wouldn't completely say that mass consumption will be out of the
way. The job creation cycle.
But job creation has to predate the mass consumption cycle.
One last question. You talked about this north-south divide and delimitation. Does it have any, investment theory, insight, or any investment case around it?
So look, I think one of the straightforward things to do is look for companies which are over-indexed on the south, right? So for example, Narayana Ridhwala in our portfolio, part of it was the realization that post-COVID, more middle class families, more corporates are buying group health cover. That in turn is driving affordability of hospital care, but also realizing that South India, because South India is the fastest growing part of the country. In fact, South India is the world's fastest growing region. 7-8% से South India grow कर रहा है. That means every 10 years South Indian GDP is doubling in dollar terms. Right? 7-8% में real GDP growth. मतलब every 10 years in dollar terms South Indian GDP is doubling. So NH, Narayana Ridhwala is a play on households are saying, employees are saying we'll have group health cover. We will go to chain hospitals. Bangalore, Hyderabad, South India generally booming. So you double down and do an NH as a play on the boom in South India, right? So you try to over-index on companies which are not just well run, but also are centric on the most vibrant part of the country. And that's something I think we'll carry on doing because it's such a powerful tailwind, Mahalakshmi. For a part of think of it as a region with 500 million people, growing at 7, 8, perhaps even 9% in some places. That's real GDP. That means nominal GDP in the south is growing at 14-15%. That means a decent South Indian company can grow at 17-18%.
But why wouldn't you, just playing devil's advocate here, why wouldn't you think about it differently? That so far, it's only the South Indian states that have done so well. And now it might just be the turn for North Indian companies to pull North India to pull up this.
You can see that
UP is a classic case.
See the investment data, both the FDI and the domestic capex is basically Gujarat, Maharashtra and South. There's very little FDI, domestic capex happening in the non-peninsular India piece, right? So in the book, this is a hot potato, but we're happy for it to be hot potato. Chapter 5, we went on why has the South pulled away so much. Because unless we get into why the South has pulled away so much, we'll not be able to address the question on why are we focusing on the South, right? And we think a lot of it is to do with the superior health outcomes, the superior infra outcomes, the superior law and order outcomes. A lot of it is to do with the interplay of social aspects, especially caste, with the economy. And to be specific, what we've said in the book is basis our travels, and we're not sociologists. हम लोग stock market में हम पैसा raise करने के लिए जाते हैं. When we go to South India, we find that people tend to intermingle when they meet us in business life. When in business life, caste doesn't seem to play a massive issue. Whereas in North, in business life, caste plays a massive issue. As soon as caste plays a role in business life, trust reduces, transaction costs go up. Right? So South may the cost of doing business in terms of social trust, cost of doing business is lower, and I think that's a very powerful thing to get going. Right? It's not apparent to us how you can replicate that. आप सड़कें तो बना लोगे, you can build infrastructure, but can you engineer social trust? It's not an easy thing to do.
Wanted to understand, Suresh from this slide, just wanted to understand, what level foreign investors will be comfortable, turning, because you talked more about seeing out.
Pramod, you want to answer this? What level foreign investors? Pramod manages our client relationships.
Yeah.
He meets foreign investors morning, evening. Pramod, can you tell what level foreign investors will be giving us money?
Yeah, that's a tough one. To begin with, we tend to treat foreign investors the same brush. It's not a monolith. Foreign investors come in different shapes and forms. Right? The sort of exodus that you saw in October is a segment of that market, which is what is usually called as hot money. Right? So these could be prop desks of investment banks, hedge funds, ETFs. That money flows very quickly from one pocket to another. The moment China announced the stimulus, that money flowed elsewhere. The longer term money, which is what we're all interested, that hasn't been participating in the last 3 years anyway. Right? So I don't think we should get perturbed by what happened in October. In fact, our discussions with longer term allocators suggest their confidence in India has only gone up in these years in terms of the macroeconomic fundamentals, the ability of corporates to deliver sustained earnings growth from a longer term perspective. Their only concern has been valuations, because all of us domestic investors have put in so much money that all of these good things are more than adequately reflected in the valuation. So in some ways, this correction that we are seeing, if it persists, we might see that better quality long-term money starting to trickle in for our own good sake, because we manage their money. But I'm pretty sure all of our competitors will also get their share. Now, at what level is a million-dollar question, but like Saurabh mentioned, the long-term average has been around 17 times for the Nifty, 17, 18 times. Today we are close to about 23 times, although the market is corrected, much of the correction is led by earnings decline, so P multiples have remained pretty much the same. Having said that, given that there has been a structural uptick in the fundamentals and also relative attractiveness to the rest of the world, you may not wait till 17, 18 times to emerge for those people to open their purse strings. We are hoping it will be sooner than that, but I don't think any of us can.
So let me put it like this: the existing clients have asked, the people who are waiting in the sidelines, the foreign investors are waiting in the sidelines. Their ask is, you're gonna call us and tell us where to stick money. Okay? Money for India is not an issue because they have a lot of the foreign investors have disinvested in China heavily. Just some background data: foreign investors have $1 trillion in India, $3 trillion in China. Okay? China में कमाई हुई नहीं है, right? China में कमाई हुई नहीं है, right? I think some 4% CAGR or something is the.
That was the slide, the one after that.
China
Yeah.
का देखो, look at the China 10-year CAGR and look at the India 10-year CAGR, right? So China has been a disappointment. They want to do some opportunistic. I mean, G ने stimulus दिया है. They have disinvested some from China. They will disinvest more. They believe we are the better long-term bet. Honestly, it doesn't need that much. You don't need to convince them that much. When the president is threatening the Chinese, and the Chinese are being equally belligerent, right? ठीक है. So they are saying हमको shift करना है. Both the existing clients and new clients are saying आप बता दो कब डालना है. ठीक है. We are our Indian धर्म संकट कि कब दबाएं. Just to put it simply, 23 is where we are on forward P. 17 is the historical norm. At some level between these two, we will press the button, and hopefully at that juncture, flows will resume into India. Right? I stress again, we don't believe that this is some massive economic crisis. It's an earnings downturn after 3 strong years for the economy. This had to come at some stage. It's come. Good thing is private capex is working out. Banking system balance sheets are in good shape. The job creation cycle that's underway. Hopefully there will be a policy response coming. And then I think as we discussed, the stock market response as well. जाओ नीचे जाओ, investment bankers लोग, private equity लोग, go down the batting order, go to that 6,000, PE them and IPO them into the stock market. So all three together I think makes for a pretty compelling combination. आएगा पैसा. These people are they're swallowing jet lag of 12-13 घंटा to come here, they're having Indian food with us, they're breathing pollution. क्यों कर रहे हैं? Because उनको belief है, they believe in the India story, which is why they're putting their body through this sort of pounding. Right? So they could sit there, and do Zoom calls with us when the cows come home, right? But they're not doing that. They're flying here every week, every day. भी मैं बोलूँगा नहीं, हमारे केस में every week हो रहा है, कोई ना कोई आ रहा है, लंबा टाइम स्पेंड कर रहा है, and the request is pretty similar. बता देना कब चेक फाड़ना है. Please इंडिया में पैसा आएगा अगले साल. About what level we can't exactly tell you. Somewhere between 17 forward P and 23 forward P. The right number. I'm happy to be told by you guys, but yeah, we try to figure out.
So sort of you are the one in the way.
Yeah, so अगर मैं बोल देता हूँ,
It's terrible.
so yeah, I'm just holding them back. I'm saying
This
this.
is a headline.
So we're saying that be patient, be patient. The reason we're telling them be patient, jokes apart, is as Pramod said, the valuations are still a little rich. The 10% correction in the indices is broadly the earnings piece. Earnings का कॉन्क दिख रहा है, right? Earnings का कॉन्क दिख रहा है, right? So earnings piece is what we've corrected by so far. The forward PE multiple is yet to come through. So that -5 at the extreme end is broadly what the market is currently baked in. The expectations resetting will, I think, take a few more months, and that's why I think we're saying just hold off a little bit. अभी शुरुआत है. The rest of it, China क्या करेगा, Trump क्या करेगा, we don't have full visibility on. But the combination of this, right? You can see क्या हो रहा है, right? This is the peak of the post-COVID economic boom was middle of F24. Middle of F24 was the peak of the economic boom, and it's decelerating. But the P multiples are in that time gone like that. ठीक है, तो अगर आपका EPS growth ऐसा आ रहा है, आपका PE multiple ऐसा जा रहा है, तो it behooves you to be a little patient and wait for a little bit more sanity to take. ये होगा मेरे
And
ख्याल
also remember the Nifty's valuation masks far greater overvaluations in the broader market, right? The small and mid cap especially, which is where a lot of earnings growth is. So you would need a far greater correction for things to be.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was coming to. So are you bearish?
So the small and mid cap, okay, let me be honest, the small and mid cap portfolios, we have chunky amount of cash. 3 months ago हमने cash का build up किया है. Mid cap portfolios, thank God, have built up really well in the last few months. This fiscal actually, mid cap has held up nicely. But somewhere in August we said it was looking bonkers to us, honestly. The situation in terms of valuation in mid cap was looking bonkers to us. So we built up cash. Interestingly, last week or so we started deploying some of the cash, right? But अभी भी double digits में cash रखा हुआ है in mid cap. As we discussed, right? Interestingly, again, even in mid cap, the private sector capital goods वाला place. Private capex में it's not that much of a problem. Consumption obviously challenge, and government capex though serious challenge. Hopefully the government capex piece gets rectified, because that seems to be an administrative. Government capex thing seems to be an administrative piece. Given that direct tax collections are all right, and GST is not great, but GST भी disaster नहीं. GST collections are not a disaster. Private direct tax collections though, are holding up pretty well. Which is why, going back to Sammy's point, I'm not disrespectful of the GDP data, because the direct tax collections are very robust, and I'm not. A lot of people believe वो भी कुछ बनाया है, but I'm not so sure that's the case. And the direct tax collection data is pretty solid. So this is a time to be circumspect, but this is not a time to be fearful. Right? तो फर्क है, डर के मारे बैठ के नीचे घुस नहीं जाना, but circumspect होने आए, because without circumspection, this sort of environment can cost you a lot of money.
but to ask you again, are you bearish? I'm asking you this because,
So-
forget about the foreign investors. Let's say a family office or a HNI actually comes and tells you that, sort of you're a great fund manager, but tell me when I should put money in your fund. Today, will you say buy today? Or will you say wait and tell me?
So our view to, as I said, to our client base, whether it's foreign clients or domestic family offices, is hold your horses a little bit, especially in mid caps. Hold your horses. As I'm saying, in large caps you're not carrying cash much. In large caps you're fully invested. Small mid caps we are carrying cash. In our all cap portfolio, we are being circumspect. We're telling clients that wait a little bit. You can see the opportunities coming. Right? You can see the opportunities coming. The country is fundamentally a healthy, buoyant economy. This is a classical cyclical downturn. This is as classical as it gets. Right? Both Nandita and I have done a master's in economics. So अगर पढ़ाई का कोई फायदा उठाना है, this is as textbook as you can get in an economic downturn. There's no point blaming this guy, that guy, ये policy, वो policy. कोई ज़रूरत ही नहीं है. You had 3 years of strong economy. You're gonna get a few quarters of soft. That's the way the whole world works. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Now when there is 1 step back, you start panicking. It doesn't help. At the same time, when 1 step back is happening, you move hastily. It doesn't help. So our point to people is be long-term greedy, be short-term circumspect.
Yeah, I think that's the crux of it. The bearishness and bullishness needs to be seen in the context of time horizons. Right? We're
I'm just
long-term
saying that-
positive. We have a long list of businesses that we want to buy. We would like them to come down a bit in terms of valuations. And that's translating into our advice to our clients as well. We are asking them to go back to their asset allocations. If you were to work off asset allocations, that asset allocation demands you to put money now, so be it. In all likelihood, it perhaps wants you to wait, because if you had a typical 60-40 equity bond portfolio 3 years ago, that would have become 80-20 given the performance of equities. So the right thing to do is rebalance downwards towards equities or deploy incremental money outside of equities. And there'll be a time, if this correction sustains, your equity allocation will go down, and that's the time to buy equities. And that's an easy thing for retail investors, high net worth individuals. So the institutional investors, of course, do it.
Just to stick with, I think the other thing we're telling our client base, and we've done it for ourselves by the way, अपना दवाई खुद खाया है, allocate heavily to USA and specifically US mid cap. So US mid cap, because of the Max 7 obsession, US mid caps are attractively valued. Earnings growth is healthy. The US economy is picked up. We've shown that an ideal construct, an Indian family office, will have half यहाँ पे, half वहाँ पे, because the diversification benefits are compelling. Point two is the correlation between America and India. The world's 2 best stock markets have the lowest pairwise correlation. Right? This is a dream come true for any investors. The world's 2 best stock markets, the 2 stock markets which have created 2/3 of global market cap in the last 10 years, their pairwise correlation is very low. So before the US elections, we put half our own wealth in our global compounders portfolio. So whoever else calls us up and listens to us, we are advising them on the same thing. Courtesy Trump, if he drives an agenda which says America को आत्मनिर्भर होना है, so let's just use Indian jargon, he wants to make America आत्मनिर्भर, then he'll drive a super powered rally in US mid cap. And US mid cap is cheap because Max 7 is the obsession over there, right? So that's the other aspect that we are being clear about to whoever wants to listen. That if you want to put money to work right here, right now, you don't want to wait, the circumspection is not for you, then dial global compounders and load up on American mid caps, which is what we are overweight on. By the way, in spite of being underweight Max 7, in spite of being radically underweight Max 7 over the last 2 years, we've beaten the S&P 500 hollow by choosing great American mid caps to invest in. So patience has a virtue, but also you have to be tactful. You combine patience with tact, I think you should be all right in this climate.
And US and India are different many levels, right? So India has been a market of small and mid cap rally over the last 3 years. US has been large cap. US has been all growth stocks. India has been all value stocks. Both are mean reverting in some ways. India is moving towards quality and growth again. America is moving towards small cap and value.
Super interesting times over. Geopolitics की तरफ से देखो interesting, valuations की तरफ से देखो interesting, technology and the disruption it causes interesting, right? So I wish I was 20 years younger, Nanta's age, so I could work a 15-hour day. But hota nahi or 15-hour days, so you can, at this age, more than my age, you can only do a 10-hour day. But whoever is willing to put their intellect into this environment, there's so much data, so much to learn, and be tactful and be patient. I think there's just incredible amounts of fun. Okay. I think you guys want to say something?
Thank you so much for your interest, guys. Thank you so much for joining us here today and for all this engagement. Thank you so much to the Masterless team for sharing their insights and for making this happen. We would like to open the stage for lunch now, and thank you. Thank you.
We stay here for lunch or we going to do somewhere?
Here.
Oh, yes, we will be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank
Very kind. Very kind. We'll have to bring the camera here, right? We've got a few copies of the book if anybody wants it.